RoboCop. Who is he? What is he? Where does he come from? He is OCP's newest soldier in their revolutionary crime management program.
The sound of servos whirring and metal footsteps changed action cinema forever. RoboCop crashed into theaters on July 17th, 1987, and proved that ultra-violent satire could become a mainstream blockbuster, while critics debated whether audiences were watching brilliant social commentary or just enjoying futuristic carnage. Paul Verhoeven directed a film that was simultaneously a superhero origin story, a Christ allegory, a corporate satire, and one of the most violent movies to ever earn mainstream distribution. Peter Weller delivered a human performance through layers of fiberglass and foam.
Dick Jones is wanted for murder.
This is absurd! That thing is a violent mechanical psychopath!
Nancy Allen played Officer Lewis, the partner who never gave up. Ronnie Cox was the slimy corporate executive you love to hate. And Kurtwood Smith created one of cinema's most sadistic villains. The film cost $13 million, got slapped with an X rating 11 times before securing an R, and grossed $53 million domestically while becoming a cultural phenomenon. It spawned sequels, a TV series, a remake, and endless debates about its political message. But behind every explosive squib and satirical commercial was chaos. An actor who couldn't sit down for 6 months, a director who'd never made an American film, editing room battles with the MPAA, and practical effects so realistic the materials smelled like rotting food. Now, before we dive in, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe because it really helps the channel grow. Let's start with number 15. Number 15. The script was written as serious drama, and Paul Verhoeven made it comedy. When screenwriters Edward Neumeier and Michael Miner wrote RoboCop, they intended it as straight-faced science fiction action. The corporate satire was there, the violence was there, but the tone was deadly serious throughout. Then Dutch director Paul Verhoeven read it and started laughing. Verhoeven saw something the writers didn't. The premise was inherently absurd. A dead cop resurrected as a corporate-owned cyborg fighting crime in a privatized dystopia was so ridiculous that playing it straight would be camp. Leaning into the absurdity and adding pitch-black humor would make it brilliant. The writers initially resisted. They'd crafted a serious examination of corporate greed and dehumanization. Verhoeven wanted commercials for artificial hearts and sunscreen that caused cancer. They argued that comedy would undermine the drama. Verhoeven insisted the comedy would enhance it by making the satire sharp instead of preachy.
Perhaps a little bit different from a normal action picture because I spent, I think, much more time with the actors than you would normally do for an action picture.
Verhoeven won. He added the satirical TV commercials, amped up the corporate doublespeak, and directed Ronnie Cox and Miguel Ferrer to play their executives as cheerfully evil rather than menacingly villainous. The fake commercials and news broadcasts became some of the film's most memorable elements. Here's the beautiful irony. The script that was meant as serious cyberpunk became a masterpiece of satirical comedy, and that comedy made the serious themes more powerful rather than less. The writers who fought against Verhoeven's vision admitted later he was completely right. Number 14. Peter Weller couldn't sit down for 6 months while filming. The RoboCop suit was a masterpiece of practical effects design that looked incredible on camera and was absolute torture for Peter Weller to wear. The suit was made of fiberglass, foam latex, and various rigid materials that didn't bend at the waist or knees the way human bodies do. Because the suit couldn't flex properly at the hip joints, Weller physically could not sit down while wearing it. Not in a chair, not on the ground, not leaning against anything. Once he was suited up for the day, he remained standing until the suit came off hours later. Production days often ran 12 to 14 hours. Weller would arrive at 6 a.m. for the 3-hour suiting process.
It's a little fable, sort of like Beauty and the Beast, about the search for the soul. That's at the core of this film. It's not about, a bionic man.
Film all day standing, then spend another hour getting out of the suit. Between takes, he couldn't rest in a chair like other actors. He had to stand or lean carefully against specially designed supports. The physical toll was immense. Weller's back and legs ached constantly. He lost significant weight during production because wearing the suit was so exhausting it burned calories just standing in it. He later described it as the most physically demanding role of his career. Here's the dedication. Weller endured 6 months of being unable to sit down to create an iconic character. Every scene where RoboCop stands motionless represents an actor who literally had no other option. The robotic stillness that made the character so distinctive wasn't just acting, it was the physical reality of wearing a suit that wouldn't let Weller be human. Number 13. The film was rated X 11 times before getting an R rating. RoboCop's violence was so extreme that the MPAA gave it an X rating, the same rating typically reserved for adult content. Director Paul Verhoeven had to cut and resubmit the film 11 times before finally receiving an R rating that would allow mainstream theatrical release. The MPAA's primary issue was the Murphy death scene, where Clarence Boddicker's gang opens fire on Murphy. The original cut showed the violence in excruciating graphic detail, with extended shots of Murphy's injuries. The MPAA determined it was too intense for an R rating.
You probably don't think I'm a very nice guy, do you?
Buddy, I think you're slime.
Verhoeven cut frames from the Murphy death sequence, resubmitted, X rating again, cut more frames, X rating. This continued through 11 separate submissions, with Verhoeven trimming tiny amounts each time, fighting to preserve as much intensity as possible, while the MPAA demanded additional reductions. The version that finally received an R rating was only slightly shorter than the original. Verhoeven had removed perhaps 30 seconds total across multiple violent sequences, but he'd done it so incrementally and strategically that the MPAA eventually approved it. Verhoeven later released an unrated director's cut on home video that restored some of the footage the MPAA had required him to remove. The unrated version showed the Murphy sequence in its full original intensity. Here's the ratings battle. Verhoeven engaged with the MPAA through 11 submissions, reducing content minimally each time until they finally approved a version that remained incredibly intense. The director, who wanted maximum impact, found the exact threshold where the MPAA would grant approval. Number 12. Detroit refused to let them film there and called the script insulting. RoboCop is set in a dystopian near-future Detroit where crime runs rampant, the police department is failing, and the city government is essentially bankrupt and controlled by corporations. When producers approached Detroit officials about filming there, the city's response was an emphatic no. Detroit's mayor and film commission read the script and were furious. They felt the screenplay portrayed Detroit as a crime-ridden hellhole beyond saving, which they argued was unfair and damaging to the city's reputation. Officials told producers they wouldn't permit filming within city limits. The rejection forced the production to film in Dallas, Texas instead. The Dallas locations had to be dressed and shot to look like Detroit, requiring additional production design work and budget. Ironically, Dallas was happy to play a dystopian crime-ridden city.
Drop the gun. You are under arrest.
As long as they weren't calling it Dallas on screen. The Detroit Film Commission's rejection became a minor controversy when the film was released and became a hit. Critics noted the irony that Detroit had rejected a film about Detroit's problems, while Detroit actually faced many of the issues the film satirized. By the late 2000s, Detroit's attitude had changed. The city embraced RoboCop as part of its cultural identity, and in 2018, a crowd-funded RoboCop statue was erected in Detroit, celebrating the film the city had once rejected. Here's the ironic redemption. The city that called the script an insulting exaggeration eventually built a statue honoring the character. Detroit rejected RoboCop, then decided to own it. Number 11. The suit took 3 hours to put on, and Weller passed out from heat. Getting Peter Weller into the RoboCop suit required 3 hours every single filming day, and the process was so exhausting that Weller occasionally passed out from heat exhaustion while being suited up. The costume was a complex multi-layer system that had to be applied in precise sequence. The process started with a full-body cooling undersuit meant to help regulate Weller's temperature. Then came foam latex muscle pieces glued directly to his skin. Next, the fiberglass armor plates were attached piece by piece. The helmet went on last because once it was sealed, Weller couldn't communicate clearly or easily get water. The suit had virtually no ventilation. Filming in Dallas, Texas during summer meant brutal heat, and Weller was essentially sealed inside multiple layers of insulation. His body temperature would climb during the suiting process, and on several occasions, he lost consciousness before the suit was fully attached. Production had to implement mandatory cooling breaks where they'd remove parts of the suit.
Come quietly or there will be trouble.
And give Weller ice packs and water before continuing. The 3-hour suiting time often stretched to 4 hours when factoring in cooling breaks and Weller's recovery. Once fully suited, Weller could only stay in costume for limited periods before risking serious heat-related health issues. The production schedule had to account for suit limitations as much as lighting or camera setups. Here's the torture. Every day of filming started with 3 hours of being sealed into a heat trap that made Weller pass out. The costume that made RoboCop iconic nearly ended production by literally cooking the actor inside it. Number 10. Paul Verhoeven had never made an American film and barely spoke English. When Orion Pictures hired Paul Verhoeven to direct RoboCop, he'd never made an American film, had limited experience with Hollywood production methods, and his English was shaky enough that he sometimes struggled to communicate with the crew. Orion took a massive risk on a foreign director with a moderate budget film. Verhoeven was known in Europe for controversial films like Turkish Delight and Soldier of Orange, but American studios were unfamiliar with his work. Producer John Davison brought him in specifically because they wanted someone who would bring a fresh, outsider perspective to American action cinema. Verhoeven's limited English created communication challenges on set. He sometimes needed help translating complex technical directions to crew members.
Well, it's an action picture, I suppose, first of all, and it has some other level.
His European sensibility clashed with American production norms around violence, humor, and pacing. But those limitations became strengths. Verhoeven's outsider status meant he saw American corporate culture and media satire with fresh eyes. His European tolerance for graphic violence pushed boundaries American directors wouldn't have crossed. His imperfect English forced him to communicate visually rather than verbally, strengthening the film's visual storytelling. The crew initially doubted Verhoeven because of the language barrier and cultural differences. By the end of production, they recognized his vision had created something unlike any American action film. Here's the outsider advantage. The director, who barely spoke English and didn't understand American filmmaking conventions, created the most distinctly American satire of the 1980s. Verhoeven's foreign perspective revealed truths about American culture that American directors couldn't see. Number 9. The toxic waste was made from food products and smelled disgusting. The scene where Emile dissolves in toxic waste required special effects that looked horrifying on screen and smelled absolutely terrible on set. Special effects artist Rob Bottin created the melting effect using food-based materials that were safe for actors but genuinely revolting to be around. The toxic waste that dissolves Emile. Was a mixture of food products, including various syrups, food coloring, and organic substances that would create the right viscosity and appearance. The problem was that under hot studio lights, these food products began to spoil and ferment, creating a smell that permeated the entire soundstage. The melting Emile prosthetics were filled with more food-based substances designed to ooze and drip realistically when triggered. These materials also began to smell terrible after sitting under lights for multiple takes. Crew members reported the stench was so bad it made people gag. Between takes, the set had to be aired out because the smell became overwhelming. The prosthetics couldn't be reused because the food materials would spoil, requiring fresh versions for each take. This added significant cost and complexity to the already challenging effects sequence. Rob Bottin later said, "Creating safe, realistic-looking toxic waste meant accepting that it would smell disgusting. There was no way around the smell issue while achieving the visual effects they needed. Here's the gross achievement. The scene that looked horrifying on screen smelled horrifying on set. The practical effects were too realistic in ways nobody wanted." Number 8. The entire film is a Christ allegory and nobody noticed for years. RoboCop is structured as a deliberate Christ allegory, with Murphy's death, resurrection, and redemption following biblical patterns. Paul Verhoeven, raised in a strict Christian household in the Netherlands, intentionally built the story as a satirical Christ narrative. Most audiences didn't notice for decades. Murphy dies in a brutal execution-style scene that mirrors crucifixion imagery. He's resurrected by OCP as RoboCop, a new being that's both human and something more. He walks on water in the final confrontation at the steel mill. He confronts the corporate money changers in the temple of capitalism. The symbolism is extensive once you know to look for it. Verhoeven has confirmed in multiple interviews that the religious allegory was intentional. He wanted to tell a resurrection story set in corporate America, examining how capitalism commodifies everything, including life, death, and rebirth. The Christ parallels were meant to add thematic depth while being subtle enough that viewers could enjoy it as straight action. Critics and audiences focused on the violence and satire, while missing the religious underpinnings entirely. It wasn't until later, scholarly analysis and Verhoeven's own interviews, that the Christ allegory became widely recognized. Here's the hidden layer. Verhoeven made an explicitly religious film disguised as ultra-violent action, and it worked so well that most people only saw the violence. The Christ story was hiding in plain sight. The director who seemed to be making irreverent trash was actually making a reverent allegory. Number 7. The gas station explosion was the largest stunt in Dallas history. The gas station destruction scene, where Clarence Boddicker's gang blows up a service station while robbing it, required what was, at the time, the largest controlled explosion ever filmed in Dallas, Texas. The stunt pushed the limits of what the city's fire marshal would approve. The production needed a real gas station that could be completely destroyed. They found an abandoned station scheduled for demolition, and received permission to blow it up for the film. But the explosion had to be carefully controlled to avoid damaging nearby structures or creating safety hazards. Special effects coordinator Dale Martin designed an explosion using multiple charges strategically placed to create maximum visual impact while directing the blast safely. The explosion was timed to send debris upward and outward rather than toward nearby buildings or the camera crew. The blast was so large that fire departments from multiple districts were put on standby. Roads were closed, nearby residents were warned in advance. The production had one chance to get it right, because once the gas station was destroyed, there would be no second take. The explosion worked perfectly, creating a massive fireball captured from multiple camera angles. The resulting footage became one of the film's most memorable action beats. Here's the one-take stakes. The biggest controlled explosion Dallas had ever seen had to work perfectly on the first try. There was no backup location, no second chance, no safety net. Number 6. The stuntman performing RoboCop's stairway fall broke his ankle. The scene where RoboCop falls down a staircase during the steel mill confrontation required a stuntman in a partial RoboCop costume to perform a dangerous fall down concrete stairs. The stunt went wrong, and the performer broke his ankle. But the take was so good they used it in the film anyway. Stuntman Lex performed the fall wearing sections of the RoboCop suit, which added weight and restricted movement just enough to make the stunt more dangerous. The fall required tumbling down about 15 concrete steps, while making it look like RoboCop was losing balance rather than deliberately falling. During the film take, Lex's ankle twisted incorrectly on one of the steps. He broke his ankle but continued the fall to complete the stunt, knowing that stopping mid-fall would ruin the take and require doing it again once he healed. The pain is visible in Lex's body language during the fall if you know to look for it. The awkward way the suit tumbles at certain points reflects genuine injury happening in real time, but the overall fall looked convincing enough that the production used it. Lex required medical treatment and missed several days of work while his ankle healed. The production paid for his medical care as part of standard stunt performer insurance. Here's the painful dedication. The stuntman broke his ankle mid-fall and kept going to finish the take. The fall that made the final cut represents genuine injury. Number 5. Peter Weller lost over 15 pounds from suit exhaustion. The physical demands of wearing the RoboCop suit for 6 months of production caused Peter Weller to lose over 15 pounds despite eating substantial meals. The suit was so exhausting to wear that Weller was burning calories faster than he could consume them. The combination of weight from the suit, restricted movement, heat exhaustion, and the constant physical strain of staying upright for 12-hour days created a caloric deficit that Weller couldn't overcome. He ate large meals during breaks, but continued losing weight throughout production. Production noticed Weller getting noticeably thinner and became concerned about his health. They consulted with medical professionals who confirmed the weight loss was from the extreme physical demands of the suit. The production added additional breaks and cooling periods, but Weller continued losing weight.
Anyway, where were we? This is the Robo Water.
By the end of filming, Weller was visibly thinner than when production started. The weight loss wasn't dramatic enough to create continuity issues on screen, but it was significant enough to worry the crew about his well-being. Weller later said the weight loss was one of the most difficult aspects of the role. No amount of eating could compensate for the physical toll of spending months sealed in the suit. He gained the weight back after filming wrapped. Here's the physical cost. Weller literally wasted away inside the costume that made him famous. The suit that turned him into RoboCop was slowly consuming the man inside it. Number 4. The walking sound was created by smashing Venetian blinds on a table. RoboCop's iconic servo-driven footsteps weren't created with synthesizers or expensive sound design equipment. Sound designer Stephen Flick created the distinctive mechanical walking sound by rhythmically smashing Venetian blinds against a table and processing the recording. Flick needed a sound that conveyed weight, mechanical precision, and inhuman movement. He experimented with various metal objects, recording them at different speeds and pitches. Nothing captured the specific quality he wanted until he tried Venetian blinds. The Venetian blind slats created a sharp metallic clatter when struck against a hard surface. Layered and processed with slight pitch shifts and reverb, the sound became RoboCop's mechanical footsteps. Each step in the film is Venetian blinds hitting a table, slowed down and enhanced. The sound became so iconic that it's been imitated in countless other robot and cyborg characters. But the original was literally just window blinds and creative audio processing. Flick created dozens of other RoboCop sounds using found objects and household items. The suit's servo whine was a modified recording of electric motors. The targeting system sounds came from modified camera mechanisms. The entire soundscape of RoboCop was built from repurposed everyday noises. Here's the lo-fi genius. One of sci-fi cinema's most recognizable sounds was created with office supplies and creativity rather than expensive equipment. The mechanical future was built from Venetian blinds. Number 3. The film was banned in multiple countries for violence against police. RoboCop faced censorship and outright bans in several countries not because of the general violence, but specifically because it showed graphic violence against police officers. Governments around the world objected to the Murphy death scene on grounds it would inspire anti-police violence. The United Kingdom censors initially refused to classify the film for theatrical release, arguing the extended torture and execution of a police officer was irresponsible and dangerous. They demanded cuts to the Murphy death before allowing distribution. West Germany banned the film entirely upon initial release. Australian censors required significant cuts. Several countries in Asia refused classification. The international objections focused specifically on Murphy's death, arguing it depicted police as vulnerable and made violence against law enforcement seem acceptable. Paul Verhoeven and the studio argued the violence was satirical, and the film actually supported law enforcement by showing the horror of Murphy's death. Censors didn't care about artistic intent. They cared about potential copycat violence. Most countries eventually released edited versions with the Murphy death significantly shortened. The full uncut version remained banned in some territories for years, until home video markets made censorship impossible to enforce. Here's the censorship irony. A film about a police officer fighting criminals got banned for showing violence against police. The movie celebrating law enforcement was deemed anti-police by government censors. The satire that made RoboCop intelligent also made it controversial. Verhoeven's critique of institutional violence was too sharp for institutions to accept. Number 2. Peter Weller studied mime to create RoboCop's movement style. Peter Weller prepared for RoboCop by studying with renowned mime Moni Yakim at Juilliard, learning movement techniques that would help him create a mechanical performance style within the restrictive suit. The robotic movements weren't just acting, they were trained in mime technique. Weller knew the suit would restrict his movement severely, so he needed to develop a movement vocabulary that would work within those constraints while conveying character. He spent weeks with Joachim learning how to make small, precise movements, to communicate emotion and intention. The mime training taught Weller how to move with economy and precision, making every gesture deliberate. He learned to create the illusion of mechanical movement while actually moving organically within the suit's limitations. The training helped him develop RoboCop's distinctive walk, head turns, and gestures. Weller's mime-influenced performance created a character that felt genuinely mechanical without being stiff or lifeless. RoboCop moved like a machine, but conveyed humanity through subtle choices in timing and gesture that came from Weller's trained movement technique. Critics and audiences noticed RoboCop's distinctive physicality without knowing it came from formal mime training. The character's movement became iconic, partly because Weller approached it as trained physical performance rather than just acting in a costume. Here's the trained performance. The robot cop who moved like no other character in film history was guided by centuries-old mime techniques. Weller brought theatrical training to blockbuster action, creating something unique. Number 1. The film predicted drone warfare, militarized police, and privatized law enforcement. RoboCop's 1987 satire of privatized police forces, drone weapons, and corporate law enforcement stopped being satire and became reality within 3 decades. The film's dystopian predictions have come true with disturbing accuracy. The film depicted OCP privatizing Detroit's police force, treating law enforcement as a profit center. By 2020, multiple cities contracted private companies for various police functions. The privatization Verhoeven satirized became actual policy discussions. ED 209, the autonomous weapons platform, predicted military and police adoption of armed drones and robotic systems. Modern police departments deploy robots for dangerous situations. Military forces use armed drones routinely. The satirical robot became real technology. The film's depiction of militarized police with military-grade equipment and corporate backing predicted the post-9/11 militarization of American law enforcement. SWAT teams with armored vehicles and military weapons became standard rather than exceptional. Even the film's corporate news satire predicted modern media's sensationalism and entertainment-focused coverage of serious events. The fake commercials and news broadcasts don't feel like satire anymore. They feel like predictions. Here's the prediction that came true. Verhoeven's satirical dystopia became actual policy reality within his lifetime. The exaggerated corporate future wasn't exaggerated enough. The film, meant as absurdist satire, became a documentary. The predictions that seemed ridiculous in 1987 look prophetic in 2024. RoboCop's greatest achievement might be predicting the future too accurately. The dystopia we were supposed to laugh at became the world we live in, and there you have it. 15 wild, weird facts about the film that turned ultra-violent satire into mainstream success, while predicting a dystopian future we're now living. From Peter Weller being unable to sit down for 6 months, to Paul Verhoeven fighting the MPAA through 11 rejections, to Detroit refusing to let them film there, to a stuntman breaking his ankle mid-fall, RoboCop was chaos held together by creative vision and practical effects, ingenuity. The film that nearly cooked its lead actor alive in a fiberglass suit, that was banned in multiple countries for violence against police, that used food products as toxic waste and smelled disgusting on set, became a cultural touchstone that defined 1980s action cinema while hiding a Christ allegory in ultra-violent action. The satire created by a Dutch director who barely spoke English became the most American film of its era. Which fact shocked you most? Drop your answers in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this deep dive into the film that proved satire could be mainstream, smash that like button and subscribe for more behind-the-scenes stories about the movies that defined our childhoods. Until next time, stay out of trouble.